Okay, hi all. My name is James. I work on the research team, which is a part of the engineering department at Affinity. And I primarily deal with all things image manipulation based. So naturally, I'm often working on and with Affinity Photo. And for this live stream, I want to take you through some usability changes I've made that primarily affect Affinity Photo. These will be available in version 2.6 when it releases, and you can enroll in a public beta now if you want to try them out sooner. There is a fair amount of detail to get through, but if I've got time at the end, I'll also quickly show you the new object selection functionality, which is machine learning powered. And apologies, I'm a little bit nervous. I haven't done one of these for over a year now due to vocal health problems, but I'm hoping this will go pretty well. Anyway, so essentially for 2.6, I've made a series of small but hopefully useful changes, and I'm going to go through my release notes here and demonstrate what each thing does. Now, primarily this was to address frustrations from particularly new users, but also for seasoned users of the Affinity apps. Hopefully you will appreciate these changes as well. So the first one on my list is image and raw layers can now be used with raster selections when deleting and duplicating. So let me give you a bit of a background about this. In Affinity, we have not just pixel layers, but also image layers. We also have other types of layers like embedded documents and that sort of thing. But image layers are essentially containers for image data. So for example, if you place like a compressed JPEG file, it will store the compressed image data. And the container is what we refer to as immutable. So you can't manipulate it the same way you can like a mutable pixel layer. I'll give you a great example here. So I've got this destroyed planet layer. You can see it's in my composition here. And let's say as a user, I don't typically mask things. I just want to make selections and delete things. If you start trying to do this in Affinity, you're going to come up against something like this. So let me draw a really quick freehand selection, and I'm going to press delete. And it deletes the entire layer. Now, for those of you who are well practiced in Affinity, you'll know this is because you need to rasterize the layer first. If you delete image layers, it just deletes the entire layer because they are, again, immutable. And what you would do instead is you would mask the area that you want to keep. But that's not particularly intuitive for new users, and often you find that new users will have to Google, well, why does this happen when I press delete? Why is this entire layer just disappearing? So let me show you what now happens in the 2.6 beta. So here's my destroyed planet layer. I will do the same thing. I'll get a freehand selection going on here, and I'll press delete, and it just deletes the portion I want. But what it's done is it's added a mask with that portion. So it's like an inverted mask, essentially, that just removes the area that you've chosen. Okay, the reason I've chosen to mask it by default rather than delete is because this way you still get an image layer. So it still maintains, for example, if it's a linked image, you might be using external linking, then you maintain that benefit. Even if it's an embedded image, you still save on document file size because you're not rasterizing to uncompressed pixel data. It's the compressed image data instead. It's just adding a mask. Apologies, I'll just move the mouse down so I can get to the chat. There we go. Hopefully I won't have to keep doing that, then the chat will just auto scroll, but apologies if I do have to do that. Yeah, okay, so the other thing is when you're duplicating. So let me give you, I've tried to find, come up with some fancy examples here rather than just showing you on a basic image. So let's say you make a marquee selection, an elliptical selection, and I'll refine that just to matte the edge detail here. Now, what I'm doing is this is in the release build, so I'm going to show you typically what happens here. Okay, so let's say I then want to duplicate just this portion, right? Command J for duplicate, and when I start to move my layer around, oh, it's done it. Sorry, because I've done it in the beta. Okay, but actually, no, I'll just go the other way around. So I've done this in the beta, and it's actually just duplicated the portion I want. Okay. Sorry, I meant to do that in the release build. So let me just show you what happens in release. Okay. It's okay, just, you know, nerves after having not done this for a while. But, yes, so essentially I will do the same thing. So I'll make a selection. I'll mat it, like so. Okay, so in the release build, what happens is you duplicate, but instead of just duplicating the selected portion, it duplicates the entire layer. And again, obviously for new users, this is, you know, confusing. It's like, well, why hasn't it just duplicated the portion that I want? So, as I mistakenly showed you first in the beta, it now does a more sensible thing, which is it takes just the selected data, like so. Okay. Now, it does rasterize this, or rather you'll see on the layers panel, it's pixel layer data. The reason I chose this rather than doing something non-destructive was because, you know, 9 out of 10 times, the user just wants to rip off a portion that they've got selected and work with that. They don't really care about it being, you know, a duplicate image layer with a mask. But the good news is that you can configure both of these behaviors. So if you go to the assistant settings up here, you'll see I've added 2 more options: delete selection from image, raw layer, and duplicate selection. So if I change these to rasterize and delete and duplicate and mask, I'll just quickly show you. So with this first example, what I would then do is end up, let me show you just here. If I delete, it rasterizes the image layer. And of course, any child layers that I've got in there, like adjustments, live filters, that sort of thing, they get rasterized as well. So do be aware of that. But, you know, it's there if the user wants to just have a simplified workflow where they don't really care about non-destructive behavior or linked images or that sort of thing. Similarly, with the duplication, although I do make it create like a pixel layer by default, what you can then do is duplicate with that other option, and instead it will duplicate the entire image layer, but it will add a mask instead. So let me just show you. You see, we've got the portion that we want, but the mask means that the rest of the layer is there. And why would you want to use this? Well, I suppose, again, if you were more into using image layers in your workflow and you had linked images, that sort of thing, you might just want to maintain that non-destructive aspect of things. So, you know, you can customize that behavior how you want. But hopefully, generally speaking, both of these things will be very useful, especially for new users. Okay, so moving on then. Apologies, I do have to work at speed because I've got quite a lot to get through. I've got about 20 things on my itinerary. What have I got in my notes? Merge down / merge selected commands now work with image and raw layers. Yeah. Okay, so again, I don't really use merge down and merge selected. I tend to just have non-destructive workflows where possible. But a lot of people do like to use these. Partly as a legacy thing, you know, to maintain speed of compositing, partly just because it's the way they're used to working from other image editing software. And so I've made a couple of changes to accommodate that. So here's a release. This is 2.5.7. I've got my cutouts here. They're 3 image layers with various layers inside. If I go to the layer menu, you'll notice I can't merge down or merge selected. So you can only do these operations with pixel layers, or if you're merging something down into a pixel layer. You can't do it with image layers, you can't do it with raw layers either. However, in the beta, you now have a bit more flexibility here. So again, here are my 3 image layers. I'll select them. So that's these cutouts down here. You'll see that I can now merge selected because I've got 3 layers selected here, so I can merge them all together. Merges them into one pixel layer, as you can see here, and also gives you, well, I suppose I should call it a notification. We call them toasts because they pop up like toast, which is a bit cute. But yeah, so the assistant tells me that it's rasterized those layers to a pixel layer. Okay, so that's something you can do. There's no kind of configuration required for that. It just kind of works. So there's no sense in kind of giving you different configurations there. The other thing is that in release, if we're merging other things, like say I wanted to merge this curves layer down into the dust layer beneath it, I can't because that's an image layer. So if I go to layer, merge down or merge selected, no, grayed out. Okay, whereas now in the beta, you can. There we go, merge down. So if I use Command E on Mac, that will merge it down into the dust layer. The rendering will change because now the curves has been merged into the dust layer. It's no longer affecting everything in the layer stack, so just be mindful of that. But you can now do that sort of thing. We've got the lighting filter here. I can merge that down into the thick fog layer beneath it as well. And you can, as long as you've got an image or, like a content layer as a base, you can merge selected with multiple layers as well. So I should, in theory, be able to merge all of these things together using merge selected. Again, the rendering will change because the adjustments have been merged into just one layer now. But yeah, you can do all that. There's a lot of flexibility there now, you'll find, in terms of being able to merge layers down and merge them together as well. Okay, next on the list, we've got in my notes, it's called Command/Control Click Drag with Marquee Selection now works on image and raw layers. Yeah, again, so a really simple change. I've got an image layer here with the butterflies, and people are used to having this workflow where they make a selection of something and you hold Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and you click drag to kind of rip off a portion of a layer and move it around. But in Affinity, if you do that, it just moves the entire image layer around. So again, bit of a confusing behavior, especially for new users. They just end up saying, what's that about? Why is it doing that? So instead, in the beta, this now happens. You will receive a notification or a toast. Oh, sorry, I'm doing that from around the center. There we are. That's a new feature, which I'll show you in a minute as well. Now, if I command click drag, it will rasterize. It will tell me it's rasterized, and now I can do the thing. I can move the layer around. Holding command actually constrains it to 45-degree increments, so I need to let go of command after I've initially used it. But there we are. You can move that around, but it does notify you that it has to rasterize the content in order to do that. But yeah, there we go. Just hopefully one less frustrating behavior that people come into. Okay, so, right, personas with image and raw layers. Yeah, so this is quite cool as well. Now, there are a couple of things going on here. I'll try and address them in the correct order. So I've got image layers in my composition here. And if I try and enter, say, one of these personas up here, like the develop persona, with an image layer or a raw layer, it will say to me, please select an RGB pixel layer before entering develop. Yeah, so again, for a new user, that's just not very clear. Like, what is an RGB pixel layer? So, you'll go hunting around, you'll say, well, okay, my document's RGB. What's an RGB pixel layer? Yeah, so... And again, sorry, yeah, if you try and do something like the tone mapping persona, it will say the same thing. Please select an RGB pixel layer. And if you go into the liquify persona, please select a pixel layer or mask before entering liquify. So that's a little clearer in that you're getting pixel layer. But again, it's still not very intuitive. And again, bound to cause frustration for people who aren't familiar with the software. So now in the beta, it just does this. Let's say I go into my background layer and I don't really care about adjustment layers. I just want to make some changes using the develop persona because you get a load of sliders in there. If I now do this, it tells me it's rasterized the layer and I can go in and I can make changes. So I can maybe bump the clarity up. Let's do something ridiculous. Let's just punch saturation up. Let's take the white balance down and the tint down just to make some changes, essentially. Click develop. Okay, and there we go. So again, for a new user, that's hopefully quite helpful. I can also do the tone mapping persona. So if I've got my other image layer here, I can enter the tone mapping persona. Again, I get the same notification that it's rasterized the image layer. And then I can do something like increase local contrast and apply. That's a bit garish, but I just wanted to do something quick to show you what happens. Now, let me undo those operations to get back to where I was. In the assistant options, the behavior for this being able to enter personas from image and raw layers is now configured by this setting, which is actually, the wording's changed. I think it used to say something like applying filters to vector layers. It's now applying filters to non-pixel layers. So if this is set to take no action, it stops you from inadvertently rasterizing an image layer when you go into a persona. But I've changed the wording. So if you go into tone mapping persona, it now gives you a very clear indication. Please rasterize the current layer before entering tone mapping. So again, that's kind of a signal that, okay, it's not doing the auto rasterization. I need to rasterize it manually. Similarly, if this setting is turned on and I inadvertently try and enter one of these personas with a layer that's not supported, like an adjustment layer, for example, it will then say to me, please select a single pixel image or raw layer before entering tone mapping. And this is very specific. If I do it with the develop persona, it says, please select pixel or raw layers, multiple, or a single image layer before entering develop. Because with pixel and raw layers, you can actually develop multiple layers simultaneously. So again, yeah, sorry, I'm just kind of, I know this is really, slightly in-depth and nerdy, but I'm just kind of covering in detail all of these bits and pieces. So again, hopefully new users will appreciate that. Okay then, so moving on. Yeah, when using a brush tool like a paintbrush or erase brush on an image or raw layer, perform a non-destructive behavior instead of rasterizing. So let me show you what happens in release or 2.5. Yeah, so I've got this planet layer here. Let's say rather than masking, I just, from old habits, I grab the erase brush tool and I just start erasing away. It rasterizes the layer, which, it's fine. But the other thing is, and there is a bit of an agenda here in the sense of we're trying to push people towards non-destructive workflows where possible, taking advantage of things like image layers. It's just that in the past, we haven't perhaps done as good a job as we could have done in terms of making that process kind of seamless, which is, evident by the things I've just covered, I think. So what will now happen in 2.6 is, sorry, I opened the wrong one there. Let me open the beta one. There we are. If I select the planet layer and grab the erase brush tool and start painting, it will now add a mask instead. So I'm not sacrificing the benefits I get from having an image layer, but equally, again, for a new user, I'm not inadvertently rasterizing or doing something destructive. I'm pushed towards a non-destructive behavior. I'll just answer a couple of questions before I move on. Why is 2.6 taking so long? Darwin was right. Yeah, well, I don't know if you heard or saw the news, but last year we were acquired by Canva, which has been a massive undertaking, transitioning everything across to how Canva work and all the rest of it. The good news is that they're completely behind what we want to do in terms of our future plans for the software, so that's really cool. But yeah, there was a lot of, development work never really stopped, but you have to also factor in that there was a lot to take on as well during that period. Also, there was just some maturation of certain features, like the machine learning stuff that's coming in 2.6, and there were some other factors as well. But yeah, we appreciate it's been longer than probably would be expected by most people, but it is very nearly there. And if you download or if you enroll in the 2.6 beta and start trying it out, you'll see that it is very nearly there as well. So hopefully not much longer to wait. Hi Trent, nice to see you. Love your videos, by the way. Some great stuff in there. Love the fact that you do live streams as well, where anything can go wrong. It's great fun. Yeah, I love, I've done the occasional live stream, but I don't tend to do them very frequently. And yeah, a bit nervous at the start, but I'm really enjoying it now. Okay. Yeah, where was I? Sorry. So yes, brushing. Right. Yeah, so erasing does a mask behavior by default. And also now if I, grab the paintbrush tool and I start painting, that will now add a pixel layer inside an image layer. So just to clarify, if you're working with pixel layers, you won't see any difference. Nothing changes here. This is just for if you're working with image layers, which are things that you've placed, or also embedded documents and raw layers as well. So if you use non-destructive raw and you start trying to paint over the layer, then instead of destructively rasterizing it, it will add a pixel layer or a mask layer if you're erasing as well. Let's change the blend mode on that and just bring the opacity down for more of a suitable effect. But yeah, there we go. So when brushing and erasing, we now do some non-destructive things by default that would otherwise be destructive, which is quite nice. Right, so in painting, okay, so I'm a bit torn about this one. I don't, some people might class it as a bug. I just class it as a slight omission or a missing feature. Inpainting brush tool and patch tool now remember sampler option between sessions/documents. Yeah, so this one's been there for a long time. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, so let's say I want to do some non-destructive inpainting. I create a new pixel layer above my initial layer. I grab the inpainting brush tool, current layer and below. So it's this thing up here, this sampler options, okay? If I then brush over the line up here, it will remove it, but it will do it non-destructively because it will put it on the pixel layer that's above the background layer, okay? However, if I now move over to another document and I want to do the same thing, it's gone back to current layer. So every single time I switch between documents or start editing another document, I have to switch this setting again, and it becomes quite tiresome. And it's the same for the patch tool. So I've now just added in the same functionality that the other retouching tools have to the inpainting and patch tools. So now with the inpainting, you'll see I didn't even need to change it. It remembered it from my last setting in the beta when I was using it. So it's now current layer and below. So I can do that and then move to another document, create a new pixel. Way accidentally hid my, let's just reset that. I'll probably press the tab key or something. Yeah, there we go. So current layer and below, okay? Now, while we're talking about inpainting, there is something else to show you as well. And this is quite terrible, actually. So most people use inpainting via the brush tool. And if I were to inpaint on this layer, it will correctly rasterize it, okay? Which is fine. That's what it should do. But I remember from the really early days of when we had content aware in another application that shall not be named, you had to do it via selections and the edit menu. And Affinity has a very similar thing. It's got edit in paint, okay? But if you use edit in paint on an image layer or a raw layer, this happens. It just removes the entire layer, which is obviously not very good. Yeah, that's a bit terrible. So now in the beta, I've just made it so that, let me just do a quick thing. I don't know why I chose this as an example. It's really, you just go and do the brush tool with this, to be honest, but hey ho. If you now do edit in paint, it rasterizes and it does the thing. It removes the bits that you've inpainted. So that's much nicer than just erroneously removing the entire layer from the layer stack, which probably Again, especially if you're a new user, even if you're an existing user, that's a bit of a WTF moment, isn't it? Okay, moving on then. So, yeah, I've mapped a default shortcut to live perspective. In fact, I don't really need to demonstrate this in release versus beta. I can just do it straight in beta. So, let's say you are placing something into perspective, like so. Again, if you are coming from other image manipulation software, your first instinct will be to free transform with Command-T on Mac, Control-T on Windows. And if you were to do that in the release build, I think it would bring up the character panel, which would have been mapped to Command-T. And then you would probably have to hunt around a little bit, and you'd eventually find the perspective filter, but you would probably find the destructive filter and not what you really want, which is the live perspective filter, which will do it non-destructively and let you, especially if you've got like a linked image or an embedded document, let you maintain that non-destructive behavior. So all I did was just map that on Command-T for Mac, Control-T for Windows, so that when you've got existing users who are used to that behavior, they will go, oh yeah, that's fine. It's not quite free transform, but it lets me manipulate the perspective of the thing. And then I may as well show you this. This is an embedded AF photo file, so I can go into Edit Document, and I can turn off or on layers and come back out, and it'll update in the parent document. Okay. So again, the nice side benefit of this is it also is another way of exposing live filters to users, because they're fairly, well, they're not unique, but you know, when you're coming from other software, you may not know about them. So any chance we can take to expose them to more users and get them using them is a good thing. Okay, now the next thing, clear and fill mask. Yeah, okay. So this is primarily for designer and publisher users. Why is that not opened? Oh, actually, I can just open that in the beta, it's fine. Yeah, so when you want to quickly clear or fill a mask, in Affinity, you can go to the channels, in Photo, you can go to the channels panel. But in Designer and Publisher, well, especially Designer, which doesn't have Studio Link, you don't have access to the channels panel, so you've got no easy way of doing that. But also for photo users, it's a nice intuitive way of doing it instead. Let me stop waffling and give you an example. So I'll duplicate the background layer. I'll go into the tone mapping persona, and I'll just add all this local contrast, then click Apply. And then I'll add an empty mask and grab the paintbrush tool, and just paint in over a specific area. Now, let's say at this point, I just want to clear the mask, or I want to fill the mask to full white. Okay. So again, in Photo, you've got the channels panel, you go to the mask alpha, and you can choose clear or fill, right? In Designer, you don't have that, but even in Photo, that's not immediately obvious to people. So what you can now do is you can right-click the mask, and I've put these options here, clear mask and fill mask. So if you clear the mask, it just makes it fully black, which means it doesn't show at all. And then if you fill the mask, it makes it fully white, which means it now reveals everything. So if I want to just start again from scratch, I can right-click, clear mask, grab my brush tool, and just start painting in. So again, just a really small thing, but hopefully a nice little workflow improvement there. It also works for adjustment layers. So for example, if I add a black and white adjustment, and I then start painting on the adjustment alpha with black, excuse me, I can then get my mask here, right click it, and I can do the same thing. I can either clear or fill it. So clear the mask so it doesn't show at all, or fill the mask if I just want full black and white over my entire image. Okay. So next thing to cover, plugins can now be used on image and raw layers. Okay, so, and again, primarily aimed towards new users, but also for existing users, this is quite a nice improvement as well. So when you know, if you like using plugins, and you've got an image layer, or even if you've got, especially if you've developed a raw layer and you've set the raw output to a raw layer rather than pixel layer, you'll probably try and run a plugin and then come up against this. They're all grayed out. So then you're like, okay, what is it? Is it to do with the color format? Do I need to go down to 8-bit from 16-bit? What do I need to do? And inevitably you end up Googling it. Okay. So that just, again, takes away a layer of frustration. So now in the beta, or 2.6 rather, these are no longer grayed out with an image layers or raw layers, and I can just run the plugin, and there we go. You can use the plugin, okay? And I won't commit the plugin, I'll just quit it for now, but when you come back to the beta, you'll notice it's now a pixel layer. There was a little toast up there to say it's been rasterized as well. So again, just a nice little streamlining of a plugin workflow there. Okay, I love this next one because it's particularly nerdy. Unassociated alpha import. Right, so in version 2, we introduced the ability to import unassociated alpha, which is primarily tagged in TIFF files from 3D rendering software. Okay, this is also known as straight alpha, where the RGB data is not pre-multiplied by the alpha data or associated with it. Somewhere along the way, though, this did break slightly. So this is what TIFFs with unassociated alpha look like in 2.5.7, which is wrong. The alpha data of the sky has actually been associated, which shouldn't happen. So now this has been fixed in 2.6. Oh, sorry, I was opening the wrong TIFF file there. I'm getting ahead of myself. But additionally, what I've also done is added another notification here to tell you what's happened with the unassociated alpha. It says it's been imported to a spare channel. So if I go to the channels panel, I'll now find my unassociated alpha down here. And then if I do want to knock the background out, I can load this to a pixel selection, mask it, and so on. Or I could do other things with it, because sometimes unassociated alpha has a workflow purpose where you don't actually want the background area to be transparent or alpha, but you want the mask to be able to do things with it. So in this case, what should I do? I'll add a brightness contrast adjustment, take the contrast down, go to the channels panel, unassociated alpha, right click it, load it to the alpha of the adjustment, and there we go. It's now just affecting more or less the foreground rather than the sky detail. There is a little bit of the sky detail included in there, I think. Yeah, you can just see that there. But then I can use that for masking. Interesting fact, so I do 3D scenes in Blender, and I could not for the life of me get Blender to write out unassociated alpha as a TIFF. And then I through trial and error, I found it's a really weird combination. I think in the film tab, or the film settings, I think you have to disable transparent. Not sure on that, don't quote me. But also, you have to specifically save it as, I think, RGBA 8-bit. So if you save it as 16-bit, you don't get unassociated alpha. You have to explicitly save it as 8-bit, which is a bit bizarre. I'm not sure if that's intentional or a bug. But for ages, I was trying to, get an unassociated alpha file out of Blender for demonstration purposes, and it was driving me bonkers because I just couldn't do it. But yeah, it's that very specific combination. Okay, so the next one. Command and return to commit text input. Okay, yeah, so this is because a lot of users were complaining about this. Just looking at the that's a good point, invert mask. I'd have to look at that. Yeah, if there isn't an easy way of doing invert mask, you are absolutely right. Perhaps that should be a thing. Yeah. Yeah, okay, I'll carry on for now. So, right, text input. Yeah, so let's say you're typing text, so I might type, so I'm making like a mock-up loading screen for a game, because why not? And at this point, because I've come from other image editing software, I've got muscle memory to use command return to commit the text input. If we do this in Affinity, it performs convert to curves. And now, because I don't realize this, my text is now a group of polycurves instead of actual editable text, which, and you know, if I find that out later, that's really annoying. So instead, what happens now is if you use command return, and this only happens when you're editing text, by the way, so it doesn't interfere with anything else, like outside of editing text. So if you're manipulating other layers around and you want to use convert to curves, it will still do that. If you've mapped control return to something else, it will still do that outside of text input. But now, if I use command return, it commits the text input and it also switches to the move tool for me. So it's immediately ready to start manipulating. Because previously, the Affinity way of doing it is that you have to use the escape key, okay? And that's kind of fine, but then you're in a position where you've still got the text caret here, and then if you want to move, you've got to very specifically target the bounding box. You can use escape again and then V to switch to the move tool, but that's 3 keystrokes, whereas now you can just use command return and immediately move the text around. Okay. I will admit there was some concern from publisher users because they like to bind command return to a page break. So what you can do is if you use other modifiers like shift command return, it won't interfere with that. Or if you use option return, all of those are all still valid. It's just that command return has now been sort of hijacked for this purpose. So yeah, that will work really well for some people, but for some other people, it might require a slight adjustment, which is understandable. It's still kind of volatile at this point, but if enough people find it horrific, then we might have to revise it, you know. Okay, layer color tag options now on layer menu. Yeah, so you might think this is a bit of a weird one. What's the purpose behind this? I will show you. So you can color tag layers by right-clicking on them and using this option down here. What you can't do, though, is record them as part of a macro. So on the layer menu at the bottom, you'll now find the same operation for the color tags. So let me show you why this is a thing. If I record a macro, and I perhaps for an ArcViz workflow, I might set up a group. I might call it render passes. Oh, if I can spell, here we are. Render passes. At which point I'll say, okay, let's say within my architecture company, we use a certain color coding for things. I try and right click and I cannot because the right click menu is blocked during macro recording. So now I have no way of color tagging my layers within a macro. So now they're on the layer menu and you can color tag them and they get recorded as part of the macro. So now I can add another group, entourage. Let's make that yellow and then group global adjustments. And let's make that green. Okay. So now I've got my macro. I can run it. It sets up my groups with the color tagging. And then I can just tidy up my layer stack, drop my render passes in, drop my adjustments in there. I don't have any entourage, sadly, for this scene, but there we go. Yeah, so you can now record those as part of a macro. There's also something else I've added that can now be recorded as a macro, but that's right at the end of my list, so we will come back to macro recording shortly. Okay, so let me just get rid of the macro panel for now. Okay. Now, sorry to bore you if you're more into photography, but this next one is for the architects. PDFs with no raster content. Now import at 300 dpi. Okay, let me just close that down. So we've got a clean slate. Okay, so as I've said, this is primarily for architecture workflows. Lots of architects like to import PDFs directly into their image or the raster image editing software, as opposed to the vector editing software for texturing workflows. Because I like to use things like flood select, pattern layers, that sort of thing, right? Previously, though, we were bringing in PDFs with no image content in them at 72 dpi when you use estimate by default. Okay. Before I go any further, I think I might need to turn off night shift. Night shift is just coming on. I'm not sure if that actually affects my capture card output, but I'm going to turn it off just in case it does and everything looks a bit beigey or yellow. Okay, where was I? Sorry. So, yeah, okay. So PDFs that don't contain any raster content, they don't actually contain an explicit DPI, so you have to infer one. If you've got raster content, that has a DPI, the metadata, so you can infer the DPI from that. But previously what we've been doing is defaulting to 72. So when you open a PDF in Photo, it looks really blurry because if you look up here, it's resolved to a very small pixel resolution, and this blurriness confuses people. This is still all vector data, so it can scale losslessly, but Photo's document view rasterizes to the pixel resolution. So if I didn't change the DPI value on import, I can do it via resize document, and I can change the DPI here, and suddenly everything looks better. But this is an extra step, and it's not intuitive, especially for new users. So now in 2.6, if DPI is set to estimate, which it is by default, it now comes in at 300. And that's a much healthier pixel resolution to be doing bitmap work with, such as floor plan texturing. Okay. As we're dealing with plans and architecture workflows, this brings me nicely onto, if I can find it, here we are, selection tool changes. So, selection tools now have anti-aliasing enabled by default, which just makes sense for pixel-based workflows. The tools now also have more consistent modifiers across Mac and Windows. So, for example, if I use the flood selection tool, I can now hold Shift to add to the existing selection. Previously, this was Control, which sounds fine, but we refer to that as the quaternary modifier. So, you know, you've got Shift, Command, sorry, let me start that again. Shift, Control, Option, Command. So 4 modifiers on Mac. Now, obviously on Windows, you don't have a 4th modifier key. So the quaternary modifier on Windows becomes right mouse. So Control on Mac, right mouse on Windows. You can already hopefully start to see the problem here. So when we're dealing with cross-platform training, which we do a lot of, this was a bit tricky. And it also goes against the common expectation of add for these selection tools being on the Shift key. So everything's kind of more standardized and consistent now. You've got Shift for add, Option is subtract. It always was anyway. But Shift is now add for the marquee tools as well, like so. And constrain is Command on Mac or Control on Windows. And on Mac, that just feels a lot nicer to use than the previous combination, which would have been Control for add and Shift for constrain. Because you're kind of, I don't know if you ever used a Mac keyboard, but you've got the Command key next to space and then the Shift key, and it just rolls off the fingers much more nicely compared to Shift and Control, which are sort of, you've got Shift and then you've got Control below, and it just feels a bit more awkward to use. So yeah, hopefully people will like those changes. Again, it's a very small detail, but the rectangular marquee tool now also has a from center checkbox, like the elliptical marquee tool has always had, as you can see here. So I just added that to the rectangular marquee tool because why not? Some people were asking for it. It doesn't hurt just to have it, really, does it? Okay, moving on then. So, more brush tool things, I think. So we had the Inpainting brush, and oh yeah, where are we? Sorry, no, marquee select intersection first. I was getting ahead of myself again. Again, this is just like hopefully a quality of life improvement. So, when you do a marquee selection over objects in Affinity, it's a slightly different behavior than you might be used to, because you have to actually intersect the entire bounds of a layer before it will be included in the selection. Now, you can toggle this behavior in Settings. It's in Tools, I believe. Select Object when intersects with Selection Marquee. And it's also on a toggle. Now, previously, again, on Mac, this toggle was Control, and then on Windows, it was right mouse. So again, Windows, you know, especially cross-platform training, it just wasn't very consistent. So instead, what we've now got is Command on Mac and then Control on Windows, because Command becomes Control on Windows. The key isn't being used for anything else when dragging. So it just made sense to have this behavior on the Command key or the Control key on Windows, and then it's kind of right there at your fingertips, rather than having the awkward right mouse, you know, holding right mouse down and then left clicking and dragging, which, yeah. So, holding Command, you can see what happens there. It toggles. So now I don't have to intersect with the entire bounds of the layer for it to be included in the selection. This kind of more affected publisher users or, DTP users, but it's across all the Affinity apps. Okay, so brush tool things. Right. I've got a couple of things to show you here. So I'll open this version in the beta and this version in release. The hint line, which a lot of people don't really know about, down here, I've added a couple of things to the hint line. So hopefully you know that you can hold Control-Option on Mac, Control-Alt on Windows, and you will get the brush parameters modifier. You can use your mouse to control width and hardness, like so. Okay, that's now on the hint line. So if you look right down here, you'll see I've added Control and Option plus drag to alter brush parameters, Control Option click to cycle brush parameter groups. And probably fewer users know about this. So if you click, it takes you to shape and spacing, and then click again and it takes you to rotation. This was actually an architecture thing. Architects were asking for a right-click brush menu so that they could quickly create a squished oval brush for blocking in shadows. So instead of just copying that idea wholesale from other software, we went with this instead, where you can single-click to get through different parameters. So, you know, you can very quickly squish a brush using this if you want. Now, there's another thing here as well. Again, just a small improvement. So if you've got the brush tool over an image layer, and you try and do this modifier, and then you start click dragging, it counts it as a brush stroke. And of course, if you're brushing over an image layer, it will then rasterize it in order to display the brush stroke. So you'll see here. Okay. Not particularly ideal, especially because with my new change of adding a mask layer, it then added a mask layer, a pixel layer to inside the current layer as well, and it just felt a bit distracting. You know, all you're trying to do is just alter the brush parameters. You're not actually committing any brush strokes at that given time. So now, when you do the same thing on non-pixel layers, it doesn't do that anymore. So now you can just alter your brush parameters without that distracting notification telling you it's rasterized the current layer, or indeed with the new it's added that there, with the new behavior where it will do the assistant and add a pixel layer inside. So you get a lot of noise happening on screen that you don't want, essentially. So that's gone now. Okay, some more improvements. We're getting to the end of here we are, parameterized macros. Parameterized macros no longer rasterize non-pixel layers when run. Okay, sounds a bit technical and fancy. But yeah, this is actually a really useful change. So, especially if you are authoring macros for other people to use, and you want to give them parameters or controls on screen. Okay, so let's say I run this macro on a background pixel layer. Okay, glow and matte. I get my settings up like so. I can modify. Let me just zoom in so you can actually see what that's doing. It's adding some kind of glow. It's all very subtle. I prefer subtle things for the most part. And then I can click apply and that's fine. It adds the effects. However, if I happen to be doing this on a non-pixel layer, so let's say I do it on a group, it rasterizes that thing. And in this instance, it's rasterized the brushwork group into a pixel layer, and it looks totally different. The effect is completely changed, which can happen sometimes, depending on what you've got going on in the layer stack, that sort of thing, how things are blending. And it's obviously not ideal because now it's changed the effect that this was having, and also it's just extra noise, and I've lost my non-destructive group. Now I checked, and there is absolutely no reason why a macro would have to rasterize like this. So now in 2.6, and this is good news for anyone who likes to, either if you're giving macros away for other people or if you're selling them, it doesn't matter. You still have to deal with the user expectation of, oh, I've run your macro and it's rasterizing everything. Why is it doing that? You no longer have to worry about that from 2.6 onwards. So I can now run the macro and yeah, it doesn't matter. It won't rasterize anything. I'll get my effect and my brushwork group is intact. So that's great, hopefully. Okay. Other little nice changes. Yeah, curves grayscale. So I'll show you what I've done here. So if I add a levels adjustment and I set the model to gray, you instantly get a grayscale preview, which is nice. That's fine. If you do it with curves, you don't. It won't actually modify. Effectively, the curves is now just acting as a pass-through until you manipulate the spline graph, at which point you get the grayscale result. So again, just a small change here. If I now do this in 2.6 grayscale, well, sorry, I should have just left the curve graph alone. Even without manipulating the spline curve, it renders the grayscale results straight away. So yeah, just a small quality of life change there. And then almost to the end now, mask to below, now macro recordable. Yeah, so I ran into this. What was I doing? I was making some macros. I think I was doing render post-production macros. And I've got a macro that is called something like use layer as mask. So what it lets you do is you can take any, for example, if you've got a render pass, you've got an alpha render pass, typically what you would have to do to use it as a mask is rasterize it to a mask explicitly here. But if you do this, it converts it to a mask layer and you lose the linked image capability. So let's say you had a workflow where all your render passes were externally linked, and then the original scene was re-rendered and the passes were updated. If you've already rasterized an alpha pass or whatever it is to a mask, you've got to do it again. You've got to do the whole process again and remask. And that's just a pain. So what I came up with was just a quick macro that does something like this. So start running a macro, recording a macro rather, procedural texture, target alpha, and then just for grayscale masks, you just sum the red, green, and blue data. You can also do a weighted intensity thing, RGB to intensity, if you want the grayscale mask to actually act like, for example, rather than being an alpha pass, if it was some other pass and you wanted to actually use the color data in a more meaningful way, you could do a weighted calculation. But I'll just sum RG and B for this, that's fine. And then what I wanted to do was select this linked image layer that's now acting as a mask, and I wanted to mask it into the layer beneath. But you can't do this currently, because if I go to arrange and move inside, that moves it inside as a child layer, not as a mask layer. There's a big distinction between the two things there. I can't use layer drop zones on the layers panel. I have to use explicit arrange commands. So I can't do it like that either. I've got mask to below on the layer menu, but that's not recordable. So I just ran into a brick wall, basically. There was no way to do it. So having a little poke around in the code, it was just a quick adaptation. And now in 2.6, you'll be able to record mask to below. So if I go to the macro here, record macro, do procedural texture, do the same thing. So some RGB, target alpha channel. I can now go to layer, mask to below, and voila, you can mask to the layer beneath it in the layer stack. And then for good measure, we'll just select the parent layer and then stop recording the macro. So now you can have a macro for your own workflows where you might want to drag in an alpha pass and use it non-destructively as a mask. You can have a macro that you, sorry, my cursor keeps jumping around. You can add a macro that does this and it masks it immediately to the layer beneath it. So hopefully some of the nerdier ones among you will find that pretty cool. But that was kind of a long overdue thing as well. Right. We're pretty much at the end. I'll just answer questions if I can see. Do Photoshop plugins or effects work in Affinity Photo? Yeah, so the .8bf files do. There are plenty of common plugins. I think on the forums there's like a list of supported plugins, and then plugins which are not technically supported but will work if you enable unsupported plugins. But all of these are Photoshop. The Nick plugins here, they're Photoshop plugin, and some astrophotography ones from Russell Croman, which I've got installed. They're Photoshop plugins that work fine as well. So yeah, you'll be able to find more documentation about any plugins that might have issues. But any kind of old school traditional 8bf plugin should work fine in Affinity. Let me just see if there are any other questions. Who is James Ritson for designer at Serif? I'd like to follow for similar designer streams. Probably, well, I don't know if she minds me naming her. We've got Katie, who is our, she deals with most of the designer stuff. If you ever watched any of the designer tutorials, it's her voice that you'll be hearing. She does a great job at kind of laying out very complex steps and operations in a really nice, easy to understand manner. So Katie is probably the closest thing we have to a designer expert. There's also Matt, who is a graphic designer and a video producer, and he uses designer predominantly. But there's no one within Affinity who kind of does the same thing that I do for photo at the moment. I don't think, in terms of just out of work time live streams and that sort of thing. Unfortunately, there will be some third party. I think. Sorry, Trent, if I'm dropping you in this, but I think Trent also looks at designer as well as photo and possibly publisher as well. I think I've seen him use all three in some of his videos or live streams. Sorry, Trent, if that's not accurate. Apologies. But Trent's a good one to go to as well. He's got loads of videos, so do check him out too. Any other questions? What about canvas rotation tool, key mapping option? Yeah, canvas rotation. I don't have anything to add at the moment, I'm afraid. Apologies. I have seen it mentioned quite a few times though, so don't worry. We are aware of it. It's not like it's falling on deaf ears. That's all I can reassure you with at the moment. Yes, I already answered why 2.6 was taking so long. For various reasons. There was the Canva acquisition, which, it didn't stop us working hard, but there was a lot to take in last year, basically. Things have kind of stabilized out now, so that's nice. And we're on track to get 2.6 out pretty soon, basically. You're not going to be waiting all year for it, let's put it that way. More creative sessions on the horizon. Sorry, I don't know personally. I'm not part of the marketing department, so I don't know what their plans are. Apologies. Oh yeah, you mostly use designer. Okay. For some reason, I always thought of you as like a heavy photo user, but yeah. Well, that's good that you cover designer heavily. Yeah, that's great news. Okay. Oh, sorry, another question. Auto blend layers in the works in Affinity Photo. No, not currently in the works, but it is something that we are aware of. Again, it's something that I would like to see in some form or another. Not to throw shade on anything, but I have used other auto blend functionality that's supposed to be neural network powered, and I didn't really make much of it. So if we do it, I would hope that we can do something a bit more effective, hopefully. Okay. So just to round off this live stream, I will quickly show you the object selection tool. I'm not going to go into loads of detail. There'll be a video tutorial for that. But let me just hide these panels for now. Okay, so it's here on the Tools panel. You will be prompted to download a model for the first time you run it. So basically, all the execution happens offline, as in it happens locally on your device. So none of your work is being uploaded for cloud processing or anything like that. I feel like that's an important thing to add, because a lot of people's concern around AI is, well, you know, privacy concerns, their data being uploaded, even if it's encrypted and so on. You know, people are obviously quite a bit nervous about that. So this ML feature is executed offline. There is quite a big model download. I think it's 200 odd megabytes, 290 megabytes. Luckily, you only have to do it once. And then there's a saliency model as well, which is for subject selection or detection, which is another 80 odd megabytes. Once you downloaded them, you can then run this tool over here. Just give it a few seconds to do its inference, and then you can hover over objects in your scene. So what it does is it segments your scene into areas or masks, and then these masks can then drive different functionality. In this case, object selection. So here it's picked up the waterfall, which is actually really cool. Most people kind of go for the obvious things like, you know, cutting someone out of a scene, that sort of thing. But I immediately sort of tried it with landscape photography, because that's what I enjoy doing. And yeah, I was really quite happy to see that it just is able to select the waterfall. And so then I can add a curves adjustment, and I can really make the waterfall quite punchy, like so. I can also command or control click that to get the selection back up, and then maybe add something like clarity, live clarity filter, just to bring out the structure of the water, but without affecting the rest of the image, the surrounding areas. So that's pretty cool as well. Yeah, and I'll show you one more example, and then I'll probably just show you how you can break down the segmentation further, I think. And then I think I'll leave it at that, because that wasn't really the focus of this video. I'll probably do another live stream at some point with some more general editing that might use this tool. So here I can select the car. Now, you know, hands up, the segmentation doesn't always do exactly the right thing that you might want it to. So you can refine it further. I mean, in fairness though, the way I did this 3D scene, I had all this volumetric fog surrounding the car. It's done well to kind of infer that the selection should sort of stop there before it gets too much into the smoke. And it's picked out the wheel, and that is technically a part of the wheel as well. So, you know, give it some credit. The one thing it hasn't done quite as well is the area down here. So I'll just mark that as foreground, mark that as background, and hopefully that will look okay. And then up here, that's probably all right. You're not going to win any awards for trying to do a cutout or a background extraction. In this case, you'd probably just do some manual refining. Or because it's a 3D render, you just take the stuff you want out and then re-render. But I can put out a selection, and then I could do something cute like add an HSL adjustment and just slide the hue around, maybe increase the saturation. So it's cool for, you know, stuff like that, where you're not actually masking or removing pixel data from a scene, but rather you're enhancing it based on a mask. Okay. One final example then. Oh, sorry. Here we are, dancer. I just wanted to show you how you can use keyboard modifiers to break down the segmentation further. So if you look at the hint line at the bottom left, it says hold Option to select components, or then you've also got Shift or Option for parts if available. So what are components and parts? Well, let's say I hover over here and it's selecting the entire subject, right? If I hold Option, it will then break the segmentation down further into the jacket, the face, the hair, the chest, and let's see what else it does, the legs, and the shoe, okay? Whereas if I let go, it's kind of harder to select a specific thing. You can kind of hover over the shoe there, but most of the time, you're getting the entire subject. Holding Option will break it down further to make that more precise. And then if you add Shift to that, it breaks it down into parts, so now I can just select the hood if I wanted. But I might use that then to select the jacket, like so. And it hasn't quite selected this area. No, it hasn't quite identified that as an area. So, not a problem. I'll just go in and manually select that. The tool is a massive time saver, but, you know, in some circumstances, it's not going to be 100% perfect. You know, we have to concede to that. But that's, you know, ordinarily that would take me a lot longer to make a selection of. You know, I'd be using the selection brush and then I'd have to constantly snap it away from the skin. Yeah, it'd take me a lot longer usually. Then I can add an HSL and do the same thing I did with the car. I can just shift the color around if you wanted to do something like that, for example. So that's pretty cool. And yeah, finally, I just wanted to show you this because, again, I thought this was quite cool. So the other model is saliency for object or subject selection, sorry. And I thought it was really interesting that if you do it on this, it actually identifies that the waterfall is the most prominent, or, you know, the most appealing part of the image, and it selects it for you. So that's really cool. The benefit of using select subject is you can work it into a macro. So if I start recording a macro, to be safe, I might, because a user might be running this on a document where they've got multiple layers. So what I will do, and I always do this usually, is deselect layers, merge visible, and this is like a temp selection layer. And then I will do select subject, and hopefully it will do the same thing. Yes, it's selected the waterfall. So then I might add, say, a group, call this localized adjustments, and then I'll add a mask to it. At which point I can then deselect, select the adjustment group, and I might add things like curves, and I'll move that inside. So move inside the group, like so. Let's add HSL. Maybe we'll add, it's not technically an adjustment, but we'll add clarity as well. Why not? What else could we do? Maybe white balance as well. Why not? And then select the parent layer and stop recording the macro. Oh no, sorry. We need to get rid of the temp selection as well. So we will select that, delete that, and then select the group above it. Okay. So then on your image, you might have a particular workflow where it's like, right, I want immediate subject masking. So I want to do a bunch of things to the main subject in the image. You can run this macro and it should, fingers crossed, do the same thing. Yep, there we are. It's masked to the waterfall. So then I can just quickly go in, ramp up my clarity. HSL doesn't really make sense with more or less pure white water, does it? But I can use curves as well to brighten it, like so. And so that's a really cool way that you can use select subject, is work it into a macro. And of course, if you didn't know, you can apply macros as part of a batch job. So you could even, rather than just leave the adjustments in their default parameters, you could even have, say, a macro that selects a subject and it brightens it, or maybe it just masks it, cuts it out, so you've just got the subject. And then you could do, you could trim it, you could crop to just the subject using clip canvas. And you can run that in a batch job of, say, you know, if you had like 100 images of furniture on a white background, you could have a macro that does like the background extraction for you and then just spits out a load of bitmaps with alpha. Just another idea of how you might use it. Okay. So, right. That's pretty much all I had. I'm just looking at the questions again. I should really get a better desk setup so I'm not leaning across all the time. Is there any way to speed up a bunch of DNG file loading? I mean, from DxO Pure Raw, I might open tens of images. It takes a long time to open. Yeah, okay. So, unfortunately, you know, there isn't any really any news there. We would need essentially like a DAM for that. Not to be confused with DAMs outside of the photographic world. A DAM inside the photographic world is something like Lightroom or Capture One or Photolab, where you can easily organize a bunch of images. Yeah, it's something that we would want to make, but, you know, no promises, can't really. We've been wanting to make it for a while, but, you know, we do have to prioritize. A DAM is not the top of our priority list. The good news is that we do, or in the future, can't give too much away, but we will be able to interface better with DAMs in terms of interchange between them and so on. But I've probably said too much there already, so I'll leave that as it is. Okay. Yeah, thank you to James and Affinity team for keeping Affinity Photo sane before Canva acquisition. Yeah, it's all been really positive, the acquisition. Canva, essentially, they just want us to keep making some really powerful high-end creative applications. That's all they want, essentially. And that's what we want. So that's basically completely aligned. It's been great, actually. And yeah, the team is all, the Affinity team's all stayed the same. We've had a few people over from Canva that have been helping us out, especially with marketing and that sort of thing. It's been really good, especially from the marketing side. You know, they obviously, as you can imagine, Canva have a huge marketing team, and we've been able to tap into that. And essentially, at the end of the day, marketing is just getting the word out to more people and getting people interested in the software. So I don't see how that can be a bad thing. You know, we want more people to use the software and to come over to us and hopefully reap the benefits and give us feedback if they're not getting the benefits that they want. Of course, it's a constant game of improving the software, but yeah, sorry, the chat is my chat window is really small, so I keep having to scroll it. Let me just pop it out. Can you select more than one area on one layer, James? I'm assuming that was for object selection, in which case, yes, you can. So it behaves like a selection tool in the sense that you see you've got these modes up here: new, add, subtract, intersect. Also, got multi-part objects as well. Yeah, that just lets you, so if objects, say, intersect with other objects, like you've got, I don't know, a chair, and the table leg intersects the chair, it lets you select the whole chair rather than missing the leg out. That's what multi-part objects means. I don't think I've got an example to show you that, though. But yeah, once you start clicking to make a selection with this tool, it automatically puts you in add mode. So any further clicks you do will just add to the existing selection, as you can see there. Okay. Tectonic dancers. Yes, when I was young as well. Will something allow saving in 32-bit float TIFF files? Version 6. Oh, 2.6, sorry. Jane. Yeah, we can already, but I think I know what you might be getting at there. So within TIFF, you can write out to, it's not in the preset list, but if you're in 32-bit already, it should use document format. But if not, you can explicitly make it use RGB 32-bit. So yes, you can write out 32-bit TIFF, but I am aware that in some cases, the way, I'm not sure if it's the compression we use, but it's not compatible with all other software with the TIFF library. So that is something for us to look at, but I can't give you a timeline for that, unfortunately. The other thing you could do, though, I think, is since we introduced CICP chunking for PNG, what you can do is you can use 32-bit PNG mainly for HDR content, but you can also use a BT709 transfer function. And yeah, that will let you use 32-bit PNG export. So you could give that a try as well, because actually PNG with a CICP chunk, the support generally is being rolled out in OS level now. Mac OS supports it. I'm not sure about Windows, probably will with the Windows 11 update. I haven't tested it, but other software as well, because we're seeing PNGs that people are bringing into Photo that are tagged with CICP chunks from other software like I think Procreate even, or Critter. I've definitely seen PNGs with 32-bit CICP PNGs from that software. So yes, other software should have better support for that. Anything else? Sorry, I'm just using this new, I was doing it old school where I'll just use a browser, but OBS has a chat dock for YouTube Live, and I'm using that instead, but it's about this big, so I keep having to scroll to see I've made it a bit bigger now. Can we have selection to path in Designer for 2.7? Oh, I see. So a raster selection to path. Well, if that was going to go in, I wouldn't just want that in Designer. I think I'd want that in Photo as well. Be able to create a vector path from a raster selection. I'll put it on a list. Yeah, because I think I've mentioned that in the past. That would be quite a useful thing to have. So yeah, thank you for the reminder. Any other questions? Joe, anything new with astrophotography? Not in 2.6, but maybe in the future. I am very much into astrophotography, and yeah, that's all I can say at this point, but there will be something. It might just be a small thing, but there will be something new in the future, yes. But that's it now, lips sealed. Yeah, I think that's it for the chat. I will just double check so I don't leave anyone hanging. No, yeah. Okay, I think that is it. Brilliant. Okay. Well, that is my live stream. I hope these changes for 2.6 are mostly positive for everyone who's watching. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate actually everyone, especially participating in the chat. It's really cool to interact with you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I just really appreciate everyone turning up, especially as I haven't done a live stream for probably over a year now. I mean, I wasn't doing them very regularly anyway, but with I had to go on voice rest, vocal rest last year, and I had some really bad strain problems with my voice, and it just completely put me off doing anything like this for quite a while. You'll notice that there haven't been any video tutorials for quite a while. In fact, the most recent thing I did was, I think it's on the main Affinity channel. It's called Intro to Affinity Photo, and if you listen very carefully, you can tell that my voice is really strained. It's not like it should be, and each section, it was each feature or each thing was actually done in different days on different days. You know, the sections are all different. It wasn't all just done in one continuous thing like I would usually do it, because I could talk for about 5 minutes and then my voice would just start to really struggle, and yeah. But thankfully, with a lot of help with speech therapy, yeah, much better now. Not 100%, but I can talk for, nearly an hour and a half now. And my voice is still, I would say, it's about 80% healthy. So that's a massive improvement. Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. I shall stop waffling now. If anyone's watching this after the fact, feel free to punch something in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. All right. I don't have a fancy outro or intro this time, so I am just going to fade you all to black. But I shall see you, hopefully, in the future. Take care, everyone. See you soon.